My name is Emily. I'm 24 years old. I've always believed that dreams are worth fighting for, even when no one else believes in them. But nothing could have prepared me for the day my own family decided I wasn't worth keeping. "You're nothing but trash. Get out of this house." That sentence, spat out by my father, is burned into me like a scar. It wasn't just anger. It was rejection in its rawest form. My mother stood behind him, clutching her apron, lips trembling as if she wanted to stop him, but she didn't. She turned her eyes away, letting silence become her answer. And in that silence, I realized I was completely alone. My clothes and notebooks were shoved into an old duffel bag and thrown onto the porch. The rain was heavy that night, pounding against the roof, soaking everything it touched. My laptop, the one I'd used to draft my startup idea, nearly slipped from my hands as I clutched it against my chest like a lifeline. The door slammed shut with a finality that left me standing outside, shivering, while neighbors whispered behind their curtains. What did she do? Even her parents don't want her. Their words stung, but not half as much as knowing they were right about one thing. My parents didn't want me. I wanted to fight back, to scream that I wasn't worthless, that I wasn't the trash they claimed I was. But the words lodged in my throat, suffocated by humiliation and heartbreak. My tears mingled with the rain until my face was nothing but salt and water. Yet in that devastation, something shifted inside me. I wasn't expelled for doing wrong. I was expelled for daring to chase a dream, for refusing to sit at the desk they'd chosen, for rejecting the safe job they insisted was my future. To them, my vision was foolish, reckless. To me, it was the only thing that made me feel alive. So I picked up my bag, shoulders heavy with sorrow but heart burning with defiance, and walked into the storm. Each step away from the house felt like stepping into a life I hadn't chosen, but one I would fight to own. By the time I reached the bus stop, the rain had turned icy. The streetlight flickered above me, casting long shadows on the pavement. I sat there, soaked and shaking, when suddenly my phone buzzed. One unread email. The subject line glowed through the cracked screen. Meeting request, investment opportunity. At first, I thought it was some cruel prank, a trick of the universe mocking me in my lowest moment. But as I stared at it, I felt that ember of defiance flare brighter. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something my parents could never have imagined. Because if they saw me as trash, I was determined to rise from the gutter and prove I was worth more than they could ever measure. The glow of that email on my cracked phone screen felt unreal, almost cruel. Just hours earlier, I'd been standing in the rain, stripped of my dignity, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And now, in the middle of my humiliation, opportunity flickered like a match in the dark. But before I could even think about the future, the weight of the present pressed down harder. The bus stop was cold, the bench unforgiving, and my soaked clothes clung to my skin like a second punishment. I replayed my father's words in my head. "You're nothing but trash." Each repetition was a knife, twisting deeper. My mother's silence hurt even more. She had the power to reach out, to stop him, to pull me back inside. And yet she chose to look away. That was the first betrayal. And in many ways, the cruelest. The night stretched on endlessly. My duffel bag sat at my feet, dripping water onto the concrete. I pulled out my notebook, its pages curling from the rain, and traced the ink lines I had drawn over countless sleepless nights. Every diagram, every scribbled note, every messy brainstorm was a reminder that I wasn't worthless, no matter what they thought. I didn't sleep much that night. The cold air kept me awake, but so did my thoughts. How could my own family decide I was disposable? When the sun rose, I dragged myself to a nearby cafe, using the little cash I had left to buy a coffee and dry out my notes. My phone buzzed again. The email wasn't a dream. It was real. A potential investor wanted to see me. The meeting was set for tomorrow. Hope. That fragile word floated in my chest like a balloon I was terrified might pop. But even as I tried to focus on what lay ahead, I couldn't escape the sting of the night before. My family's rejection wasn't just about me leaving the house, it was about them declaring that my voice, my dreams, my very self had no place under their roof. That kind of wound doesn't close overnight. And yet, sitting there in that cafe with my notebook spread out, something hardened inside me. If they didn't believe in me, fine. If they thought I was trash, fine. I would show them and the world that even what's thrown away can shine. At this point, if you've ever felt like the people closest to you were the ones holding you back, or worse, tearing you down, stay with me. Because what happened next was more than just survival, it was transformation. And I promise, the twist will make you rethink what betrayal really means. If this story moves you, don't forget to hit subscribe. Sometimes the smallest click can keep these family stories alive. Back in that cafe, I mapped out every detail I could. My notebook was my anchor. I wrote and rewrote my pitch, crafting answers to every tough question I imagined. I practiced my voice in whispers, earning strange looks from strangers at the next table. But I didn't care. Still, even as I planned, the humiliation of last night clung to me like the dampness in my clothes. Memories of my father's voice, my mother's silence, the neighbors' whispers, they all bled into my mind like poison. That's what betrayal does. It's not just one cut. It's 100 invisible wounds you carry forward. Yet I held on to that email like a lifeline. The meeting was my chance to prove them wrong. And deep down, I made myself a promise. If they see me as trash, I'll rise like fire from the landfill. I'll turn their rejection into the reason I succeed. What I didn't know then was that betrayal had more layers. My parents' cruelty was only the first. Ahead of me, another wound was waiting. Sharper, deeper, and closer to the heart. The next day came faster than I was ready for. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but there was no time to think about exhaustion. This meeting was my chance. Maybe my only one. I knew I couldn't walk into a boardroom looking like I'd been thrown onto the street the night before, even if that was the truth. So I called the one person I still believed in, Anna, my best friend since college. She'd been with me through late-night brainstorming sessions, coffee-fueled deadlines, and whispered promises that we'd conquer the world together. "Anna," I said, my voice cracking, "I need your help. Just for today. There's a meeting with investors. I can't do this alone." Her response was immediate, warm. "Of course, Em. You've always had the brains. I'll just be your backup. We'll nail this together." For the first time since the stormy night on my parents' porch, I exhaled. Relief swept over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. At least someone was still on my side. Anna arrived that morning with a blazer for me to borrow and makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. She even grabbed us bagels on the way. "You're gonna crush this," she said with a grin, handing me coffee. "Just remember, you deserve to be in that room." Her words patched up wounds I didn't even realize were still bleeding. By the time we reached the tall glass building downtown, I was trembling less from fear and more from anticipation. The elevator ride felt like forever, every floor ding amplifying my heartbeat. We stepped into the sleek boardroom, its long mahogany table gleaming under bright lights. Suits and ties filled the seats, investors flipping through documents with detached expressions. But before I could even set my bag down, my stomach dropped. Anna didn't sit beside me. She walked to the other side of the table, smiling, confident. I froze. "Anna?" I whispered. She turned, her eyes sharp, no trace of the warmth I had clung to. "Sorry, Em. Business is business." My blood ran cold. She opened her laptop, and on the screen were slides I recognized instantly. My slides, my diagrams, my words, my idea. The investors leaned forward, intrigued. Anna began her pitch, her voice steady and persuasive. It was everything we had ever practiced. Except now, I was watching my best friend wield my dream like it was hers. I felt the air squeeze out of my lungs. My mind screamed, "This can't be real. She wouldn't do this to me." Not Anna. But every polished sentence she delivered proved otherwise. When it was finally my turn to speak, one of the investors looked at me with a raised brow. "And you are?" I swallowed hard. my throat dry. My hands trembled as I clutched my notebook. I'm Emily. This idea, it's mine. Anna let out a soft laugh, tilting her head like she pitied me. Oh, Em, you always dreamed big, but you never had the guts to follow through. I did. That's the difference between us. The betrayal cut deeper than my parents' rejection ever could. Family had thrown me out. But Anna had cut out the last piece of trust I held on to. My heart pounded, torn between screaming and collapsing. I saw the investors shifting, whispering to each other. Doubt clouded the room. Tears stung my eyes, but anger surged just as fiercely. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms. Anna could steal my slides, my stage, even my confidence, but she couldn't steal my truth. For a moment, though, I stayed quiet. The humiliation was suffocating. I stared down at my notebook, pages warped from rain, and felt every weight of betrayal crushing me. This was the second time in 2 days I had been branded worthless, first by blood, now by friendship. But somewhere deep, the ember inside me refused to die. I looked up, blinking back tears, and saw the investors still waiting, still listening. The silence stretched long, heavy, demanding a choice, crumble or rise. I straightened my shoulders, though my voice trembled. If you want polished slides, then yes, she has them. But if you want the heart, the vision, the fight that built this idea, you're looking at her, me, not Anna. The room went still. Even Anna paused, her confident mask cracking for a fraction of a second. The battle wasn't over, but I knew in that instant, betrayal wouldn't end me. It would ignite me. And that was the moment the tide began to turn. The silence in the boardroom stretched so long it hurt. My words, "You're looking at her, me, not Anna," still hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. One of the senior investors, a tall man with silver hair and piercing eyes, leaned forward. His nameplate read, Mr. Parker. He didn't look amused. "Emily, is it? If this is truly your idea, prove it. We don't invest based on sentiment. Show us you have more than just passion." My chest tightened. The room seemed to shrink. Anna smirked from across the table, leaning back as if the verdict was already in her favor. I could almost hear her thoughts. "You'll choke. You always do." I took a shaky breath and flipped open my rain-stained notebook. The pages were warped, the ink smudged, but it was mine. Raw, authentic, messy proof of every sleepless night. Mr. Parker fired the first question. "What's your revenue model?" I swallowed hard. My mind scrambled for the words I had rehearsed 100 times in whispers at the cafe. The app operates on a freemium structure. Basic features are free, but advanced analytics, those are subscription-based. The real profit comes from the partnerships with small businesses looking to scale. A few investors nodded, jotting notes. Anna's smile faltered slightly. But Mr. Parker wasn't done. His next question came like a punch. "And what about scalability? How do you expect to grow this beyond a niche audience?" I tightened my grip on the notebook, because I've lived the problem. I know the gaps better than anyone in this room, and I've built a system flexible enough to adapt to different markets. It's not theory, it's lived experience. My voice shook at first, but with every word I felt steadier, stronger. Still, Mr. Parker pressed harder. "You speak with emotion. But what happens when emotion runs out? Do you have the discipline, the numbers?" I felt sweat bead on my forehead. This was the moment Anna wanted, me stumbling, collapsing under pressure. But instead of backing down, I met his eyes. My voice, though soft, carried steel. Numbers don't mean anything without vision, and vision doesn't mean anything without grit. I have all three. If you think passion fades, then you've never seen someone claw their way back after being thrown out of their own home. You're looking at someone who has nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. The room went still. Even Mr. Parker paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. Anna broke the silence, her tone dripping with contempt. "She's just playing the victim card. Investors want stability, not sob stories. I turned to her, my chest rising with each breath. Victim? Number. Victims stay down. I got back up. Twice. Once after my own parents called me trash, and again when my best friend decided I wasn't worth loyalty. So call me what you want, Anna, but I'd rather stand here scarred and honest than sit there polished and fake. A murmur rippled through the room. The investors weren't looking at Anna anymore. Their eyes were on me. Mr. Parker leaned back, tapping his pen against the table. His expression was unreadable. You've got fire, but fire burns out. Tell me, what happens if we give you $1 million and you fail? I took a deep breath. My hands stopped shaking. For the first time, I felt in control. If I fail, then I fail forward. But at least you'll know you invested in someone who refuses to quit, because I've already lived rock bottom, and you don't fear falling once you've already been thrown into the gutter. Silence again. This time it wasn't suffocating, it was heavy with consideration. One of the younger associates at the end of the table leaned forward, whispering something to Mr. Parker. I caught just enough of it. She's the real deal. Anna's composure cracked. Her knuckles whitened around her pen as she leaned in. You can't possibly take her seriously. Look at her, she's a mess. I came prepared. I have the slides, the polish, Mr. Parker raised a hand, silencing her mid-sentence. His gaze locked on me. Prepared slides can be bought, polished words can be memorized, but resilience? That can't be faked. And right now, resilience is worth more than any slideshow. Anna's face drained of color. My heart hammered in my chest. Was this real? Had I just turned the tide? Mr. Parker's expression softened ever so slightly. We're not done yet, Emily. But you've given us something Anna didn't. Authenticity. Come back tomorrow. Bring your numbers, and if they hold up, you may just walk out of here with more than dignity. You may walk out with a deal. The room exhaled. I did too, though my knees nearly gave out beneath me. Anna stared at me, her eyes burning with disbelief and fury. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. As I gathered my soaked notebook and bag, Mr. Parker's final words echoed in my head. Authenticity can't be faked. I stepped out of that boardroom not with a contract, not yet, but with something more powerful. A fighting chance. And that chance was more than enough to ignite me for what came next. Walking out of that glass building, my legs nearly gave out beneath me. Mr. Parker's words, "Come back tomorrow. Bring your numbers," echoed in my head. I hadn't won, not yet. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting in the dark anymore. There was a path forward, however narrow. That night, I spread my notebook across the tiny cafe table that had become my makeshift office. The rain still drizzled outside, blurring the city lights. But I didn't care. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. My laptop hummed with spreadsheets as I gathered every piece of data I had. Revenue projections, market research, customer surveys. All messy, all imperfect, but real. My hands shook, not from the cold this time, but from the weight of tomorrow. If I failed, it wasn't just a lost deal. It was proof to my parents, to Anna, to everyone who whispered that I was worthless, that they were right. At one point, exhaustion crashed over me. I buried my face in my hands and whispered, "What if I'm not enough?" But then, as if answering, my phone buzzed. A message from that young associate who'd whispered in my favor, "Don't give up. You've got this." It wasn't much, but it was enough to steady me. By dawn, my eyes were bloodshot, my fingers raw from typing, but I had what I needed: numbers, evidence, proof that my dream wasn't just smoke, it was fire waiting to spread. The next morning, I stood once again before the tall glass building. My borrowed blazer was wrinkled, my shoes scuffed, but my heart beat with a steadiness I hadn't felt in days. Inside the boardroom, the tension was thicker than ever. Anna sat across from me, perfectly polished, lips curled in a smirk that screamed overconfidence. "Well," she drawled, flipping her hair. "Ready to embarrass yourself again, Em?" I didn't answer. I opened my notebook and laid out my materials. Mr. Parker gestured for me to begin. The floor is yours." I took a deep breath, then dove in. I explained the revenue model again, this time backed by spreadsheets and early customer feedback. I showed graphs scribbled over at midnight, charts pulled from every scrap of data I could find. It wasn't flawless, but it was mine, authentic, raw, and grounded in the very reality I had lived. Anna interrupted more than once. "Her numbers are amateur. She doesn't have the polish this requires, but every time she tried to cut me down, I stood taller." "Maybe I don't have polish," I shot back once, locking eyes with her. "But polish doesn't make an idea work. People do. And these numbers? They represent real people I've spoken to, real problems I've lived through. That's something slides can't fake." The room shifted. Investors leaned forward, questions flying. I answered each with a mix of nerves and conviction, my voice growing steadier as the minutes passed. At last, silence fell. Mr. Parker folded his hands. The decision hung in the air like a held breath. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Miss Emily," he said, "I've seen hundreds of pitches, slick decks, perfect rehearsals, but I've rarely seen someone fight with this much authenticity. You remind me of why I became an investor in the first place. To back people who refuse to quit." He slid a folder across the table. A contract. Anna's face went white. Mr. Parker continued, $1 million. Funding, mentorship, and the resources to build your vision. If you're willing to take it. My breath caught. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. All the voices that had told me I was trash screamed in my memory, but louder still was the voice inside me that whispered, "You are enough." I signed. Applause broke out around the table. The associate who had encouraged me grinned. Anna stormed out, her heels clicking like thunder. I stood there, holding the signed contract, and felt something shift inside me. Not just victory, liberation. News spread faster than I expected. By evening, my phone buzzed with calls I hadn't imagined I'd ever receive. And then, one name appeared on the screen. Mom. For a long moment, I stared at it, torn between fury and longing. My thumb hovered before I finally answered. Her voice shook on the other end. "Emily, we saw the news. About the deal. About the $1 million A pause. Your father and we were wrong. Please come home." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't the same tears of helplessness as before. They were tears of choice. For the first time, the power was mine. I looked out the cafe window at the glowing city, at the life that was finally opening before me. And softly, firmly, I said, "I'm not trash. I never was. And I don't need to come home. I already found one, in myself." When the call ended, I sat in silence, the phone still warm in my hand. My mother's voice, shaky and remorseful, lingered in my ears. Once, I would have given anything to hear those words, to be asked back, to be wanted again. But now I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. For so long, I believed my worth came from them, from their approval. And when they cast me out, I thought it meant I had none. But sitting there with $1 million contract in my bag and fire in my chest, I finally understood. My worth was never theirs to decide. I stepped out into the evening air. The city buzzed around me, headlights streaking across wet pavement, neon signs glowing like constellations. I tilted my face up to the sky. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like fresh beginnings. I pulled the contract from my bag and held it for a moment, the paper crisp beneath my fingertips. To anyone else, it was just ink on a page. To me, it was proof. Proof that rejection doesn't define us. Proof that betrayal can't bury us. Proof that even when the people closest to you call you trash, you can rise and shine brighter than they ever imagined. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt free. Here's the truth. We don't get to choose who betrays us. We don't get to control whether our family supports us or whether friends stay loyal. But we do get to choose what comes next. We can stay broken, or we can rise. So if you've ever been told you were worthless, if you've ever been thrown aside like trash, remember my story. You're not defined by the people who leave you behind. You're defined by the courage to keep going when they do. Because sometimes, the deepest betrayal becomes the sharpest blade, one that carves out the strongest version of yourself. I walked into the night with the contract in hand, my reflection glowing in the cafe window. For the first time, I didn't see the girl crying in the rain. I saw a woman who had fought through betrayal, through silence, through lies, and built herself back from the ashes. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real victory. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear it. Would you forgive? Or would you walk away like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because family stories aren't just about pain, they're about finding strength in the places no one expects.